Hello, everybody. Welcome to this introduction to the masterclass on Moonshot Thinking. And my talk will be giving you sort of an orientation about Moonshot Thinking, exponential technologies, and desirable futures. My name is Harold Neitert. I'm the CEO and the curator of the Futur Institute. And I'm really happy about our partnership with TMA and the opportunity to speak to you today. So let us dive in and see what kind of ideas are behind Moonshot Thinking. First of all, reality check. I think we know that our house is on fire. We are reminded by our young people. Yesterday or 2 days ago, we had the 60th years anniversary of JFK. Talking about Moonshot Thinking, and we will talk a little bit about it in a couple of minutes. But what we are looking at is actually the next decade of action, where we need to solve a lot of challenges which are addressing us. And not only are we slowly getting out of this COVID pandemic, and hopefully in your country as well, but we know that this will stay with us for a long time. So what we learned is that, climate change is the most biggest issue, which is, sort of in the back burner right now, but that is the biggest thing, which is sort of on an exponential curve, because the next 10 years we can and have to change the impact on what can we impact in the next 10 years, which then will affect, the next decades. Now, we also see as capitalism maybe in saving its peak, and democracy is under threat from a lot of fake news and hate speech online. But we see that the technology part, the exponential curve of technology, that might be the only thing we actually understand, because we know almost every 2 years there's a new smartphone. It's faster than the other one. It's double the faster. It has better chips. And if you compare it, for example, with a hard disk, every holiday or end of the year, you might say, I want to do a new hard disk. And if you wait half a year later, it's half the price for double the capacity. So it's sort of a rhythm of technology where we understand exponential threat. But now COVID is also something which is we saw exponentially, and we can now, or actually everybody on the globe understands that there's some changes. If we don't stop it or interact fast, it will escalate, and then you have catastrophic news. So we are in a situation right now where we have to think, okay, all of these threats, all of the challenges are coming towards us. Can we still address these needs and new ideas with the same thinking that basically brought us here? So our pledge is that we need to find a new way to think and have sort of a mindset shift. So this is our invitation to think about this. And I want to start about one chapter about thinking about exponential technologies. Most of you might be familiar with a lot of the different changes we see around us in technology. And most of us probably compare this with, for example, chips and hard disks and saving. But also you see that there's autonomous driving now. So all the chip technology is allowing also exponential technologies in self-driving cars, or robotics, or AI, or space technology, nanotech, CRISPR, 3D printing, quantum computing. All of these new technologies are somehow already in development since years, and are starting to pop up into our lives, and will change how we behave as a citizen, how do we behave in corporations, as well as how societies will move if you have more of these technologies and changes in our daily lives. So the exponential curve was predicted by Ray Kurzweil when he looked back and saw that from the beginning of the development of transistors and then over to silicon chips, every 18 months, you're more or less doubling the capacity. And if you compare this to 1,000 euros, for example, or dollars, what it would buy in capacity and speed, this will lead to what he calls the singularity, that somehow around computer technology, and the chips in computers for less than €1,000 will have more brain capacity or calculation as humans combined. So it's something radically which will happen over the next 2 decades only now. And some even say that by the end of this decade in 2029 and beginning of the 2030s, we see radical shifts in quantum computing and some of these technologies. So there's something on the horizon here which is, let's say, hard to grasp, but the technology is there. And we see that the trick with exponential technologies is that it really takes a long time until something actually happens. So, and this is, for example, what we call the iPhone moment, or called the iPhone moment in mobile phones. So for a long time, there was sort of a lot of disappointment. The first trial was not so good. The first phones, Blackberries were good only for texting, but not really for what we do now with our phones. But you saw that just in the last, 13 years or so, this exponential development is changing industries, is creating trillion-dollar economies and companies on the stock market. So this kind of moment where you can compare it almost to a pan when you make popcorn, so that you put the mice in there, nothing happens for a long time, and you almost want to throw it out because maybe nothing happens, and all of a sudden one, mice corn pops, and then you're like, what is this? And then you wait another little bit of a minute or two, and all of a sudden the whole thing explodes. So nothing happens for a long time, a little stuff happens, and then the whole thing goes off. So these kind of moments we will see in different industries and different technologies going out. You can compare it with the mRNA development for the vaccine, which actually the development of the messenger RNA vaccines like from BioNTech, Pfizer, or Moderna are actually developed only in 12 months time. So after this sort of COVID moment, if you want to compare it, but it is based on a 30-year development on messenger RNA. So nothing happened for the last 30 years. It was like still in the labs, and all of a sudden there's a demand. And now the technology could focus on this one problem, and all of a sudden we see basically with record speed that within 12 months a vaccine is released, which has never been done before. So even though there's a lot of bad, this kind of understanding of technology and the potential maybe helps us in driving this change as well. We see robotics, and we talk about robotics, and if we see this picture, this is the one part of the robotics we understand, manufacturing cars and welding and all of these hard tasks. But robotic can be found also in medical applications. For example, Otto Bock is a company from Germany, and they have one of the leaders in prosthesis, where robotic, AI, as well as very much mechanical engineering together helps in the health sector. And for some people, we wouldn't call it robotics because it's a health instrument, but you see that we have to also understand that these pictures and robotics is not the same, because this will take over in different kind of industries. And here's another part of robotic or animated mechanics, where you look for biomimicry from nature and can maybe learn what is happening in nature. How can we mimic movement where we have lost not a lot of energy, and can produce movements and or let's say autonomous vehicles like these ones, basically with low energy consumption. So another very much exponential technology is CRISPR, and CRISPR has been developed over years in different universities across the world. It started in Spain, but now most of the patents are owned by Harvard and MIT at the Broad Institute in Boston. And recently, the two main inventors got the Chemical Nobel Prize. So CRISPR allows to now manipulate DNAs, for example, for better food harvesting or other changes where you might want to optimize mostly agriculture, for example. Interesting fact, for example, is that now you could also use DNA to store data, and this is already pretty old, but did you know that actually in 1 gram of DNA, you can store 700 terabytes of DNA? of data. So that compares to sort of a big pallet of hard disk, which you can, I don't know, put together in a truck, and it actually all fits on the tip of your, you know, of a hair, basically. So these things are still so much unbelievable, and it sounds science fiction, but it's in the labs today. And there's even startups who take this data approach now into agriculture as well and use plants as DNA. And you can even store, you know, certain things. So it's an interesting fact. It's not on the horizon, and that's sort of one of the things which sort of compare this to one of the mice corns. You have to look at, okay, what is happening, what is little boiling, and whenever this could pop up, this could mean that this is the next curve of after maybe silicon has been come not small enough anymore. There's more ways how to accelerate the speed. Now, another wonderful new material is graphene, for example, which is sort of lighter as a feather and harder than diamond and blacker than black. It sounds all fantastic, very Steve Jobs-like, but with graphene, you can actually address and program on an atom level material, so which allows you for very small contact lenses or water filters, and so on and so forth. So there's, for example, fashion, which uses graphene, and it has fantastic materials. So this kind of material is developed by the University in Manchester, and it will also, is just before there's some more industrialization to help produce this material on scale. So again, something very science fiction is already in the labs. And speaking of science fiction, you probably know Ex Machina. And this is somehow what I'm talking about also. If we look at where does this inspiration come from, where do people in the labs talk about these, and how do they develop this? A lot of them look at science fiction, either in books or in movies. And this is, if you haven't seen this movie, it's pretty interesting, because you wouldn't understand how can you develop feelings in a robot. But here it was a very good depiction in Hollywood. So there is something already in the market, if you will, or on available. And this is a robot, Sophia, which has been around since a couple of years. Their founders and developers are having their lab in Hong Kong. And so they have been around on conference zones, and you can already see that some of the, let's say, AI and how she reacts to the audience or to speakers or moderators has been already quite remarkable. I think that these kind of things are definitely technology developments which people can do. We still have to understand and maybe discuss whether we should do them, or is there not another priority in order to probably you know, help other industries and so on. Here's maybe an interesting idea. This is the iPhone 20, I would argue. So if you take some of these exponential developments together and say, well, how would we see this maybe in, let's say, 5 or 8 years from now, then this could be the phone. So you have a contact lens, you saw that this is possible, and that's the only thing you actually see around her eye. And maybe the rest of the phone is somehow maybe hidden. So let's say she might have the camera in her eye. She also has a microphone maybe implanted somewhere near the nose and or near the cheekbone. And there's maybe a brain-computer interface patch somehow stitched like a tattoo under her eyebrow. And an antenna could be, you know, 6G or something, is maybe the hair extension. So I might not have the best reception in these days. And everything else which doesn't fit somehow on the body is maybe a little earring, which is probably not even visible to somebody to understand if this is just fashion or technology. So I think this is something which, you know, maybe iPhone 20 is not here in 2020, but something like these kind of trends could work out, and we would always be surprised what technology is. And now, if this is the case, then we have to understand a little bit, how do we play in this world where computing is all around us, and it's no longer in hardware and something tangible you can see, but it's basically like liquidity or air or something like that. And there's dust computing as a concept. So if computing is an innovation driver, then we have to think most likely also, well, how will our consumers, our customers, and our employees react to this, and where are chances for us as a company? You see already that there's a lot of value in public companies who are going into technology, and the biggest winners also over the last 12, 13 months have been the big electronic companies, the big platforms, so Apple, Alphabet. These numbers are from last summer, but you know that we are now in these trillion-dollar areas. Europe doesn't have so many, but also in China, South Korea, there are these big conglomerates. So a lot of, let's say, value is shifting into these things. And now even with blockchain, you see that there's a lot of fluctuation, new concepts in finance. So there's so much going on that you have to try to define your own world and to make your prediction of, okay, how do you think the world will look like in 10 years from now? And what does it mean? So one thing we know, besides the technology trend, is that the climate crisis is going on. And so the question is, how can we use new ways of thinking, solutions, including technology, to address the challenge? I feel that we must have much more drive towards understanding a feeling for time. So we know that there's the climate data. We have since almost 50 years that the Club of Rome published the limits to growth and said, well, this cannot go on like this in 72. So how we have to change, there has to be a new model, because otherwise we're already using 1.5 times the Earth and all its materials and resources. So there has to be an end. And especially if you look at the climate change that we're going from, to +1 degrees compared to the, the beginning of the recording. Now we have to avoid that it gets hotter than 1.5 degrees. Now we have all the data already, and it feels like we as people, we are in this fright or flight mode, and we're like looking at almost like in the eye of the tiger. I would compare it and say, okay, we have all the data, and what do? We stop. We don't move, because we feel that maybe something else is happening, maybe somebody else is in charge, but please don't do anything to me, or I'm not the one. I mean, maybe it's a government, maybe it's Bill Gates, maybe it's the UN, somebody else is in charge, but that's not the right thing. We have to develop a feeling for it, and we all have to do our part to say, okay, what can we help in order to bring our company, our teams, our family into this kind of new world where climate change has to be beaten. And we know that in the beginning from COVID, we said, flatten the curve. So we have there's a capacity of beds or of what our environment and governments and our systems can bear. And so here's the same thing. We have to press the data under these 1.5 degrees. Now, if you look at all the data, this is all there, and you cannot really understand, wow, look at one day alone, cubic kilometers of ice was melting. 2 cubic kilometers. Can you understand? The 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, but like a big cube, and melted in one day. Unbelievable. 2 years ago here in 13th of June. And I think the data maybe should be presented more like this. So this is an actual picture from Greenland, and this should be snow. Obviously, because it's a snow pledge, and it's dogs which you are not tearing through a sea or a lake or something, but that's a reality. And so I feel that we have to start new narratives in order to bring the urgency of what is happening, because if we don't do enough in the next 10 years, in this decade, then we don't have chances, and our kids and ourselves, even our lives, will be in trouble. And so we pledged that you have to get a feeling for the future. So you all have to be futurist in a way and develop your own ideas and scenarios of where is your company going, where is your industry going, what is changing if, for example, if there's, like now we know there's no flights from a lot of cities, not from Europe, not from the US. So tourism is really hard under pressure. So if the prices for CO2 will rise, so that the prices for flying will be higher, that means that most likely we will not have a lot of long distance tourism in certain countries, including Thailand. So how do you either attract people in your region, or how do you adapt to this new situation, to this possibility, to that scenario? So now this is, I think, where Moonshot Thinking is trying to pull some of these ideas together and helps you to develop an idea of where you want to go. So 25th of May, 61. So this Tuesday, we celebrated, we actually had a celebration event with, to celebrate the 60 years of this Moonshot speech, where JFK said, "I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely back to Earth." Now, when he said that, he was more or less in the same situation we are right now. This is 61, we are 21. And he said, before this decade is out, before 2030, basically in our situation, so in the next 8 years and next 9 years, we need to think the unthinkable. And when he said this in Congress, basically, we have to bring a man on the moon. They did not have invented Velcro, to put something, glue something together in space, or Teflon, or had all the programming done of the trajectories, how the rocket ship will land, and so on and so forth. So he was asking for money from Congress, and he said, here is the goal, but there was no specific plan how exactly he's doing it. But it was sort of starting an industry and starting a mindset shift that if this is a goal we all have to commit to, that in the end, there's an anecdote that he asked, for example, when he was visiting Houston, he asked a cleaning person and said, he was sweeping the floor, "What are you doing actually?" And he said, "I am helping to bring a man on the moon." And this kind of feeling is what I mean if I say a feeling for time and a feeling for urgency, because we all have this, before this decade is out, we got to solve the climate crisis and adapt our thinking, our societies, our companies, our corporations, and our family lives towards what is the goal that we want to achieve and how do we want to live in the next 10 years. So when the goal was achieved, and on the 20th of July, the Eagle was landed, and the next day on the 21st, Neil Armstrong put this small step for mankind, or giant leap for mankind and a small step for him. Then, actually our perception has changed, that all of a sudden we as people could actually achieve the impossible. And I think we are all called in this situation, especially still in this kind of COVID situation. We are, in a crisis mode, but we have to see, okay, develop for ourselves and in your leadership. How do we actually get out of here, and how can we develop our own narrative and strategy? Where do we go from here? This kind of moonshot thinking is translated for Europe, for example, as a basis of the Green New Deal, as well as some of the new funding for the European Union with Mariana Mazzucato, who actually talks about purpose-driven missions. And there's a new book I can really highly recommend. It's called The Mission Economy, where she also pledges to understand that public funding, as well as innovation and venture capital and innovation, has to address and come together in a new way to address these challenges. And if we talk about sort of a definition of moonshots, we see these, these items, these check marks. So first of all, we look at, can you serve as a purpose? So, is a purpose your company? Is a purpose the greater good that you are contributing to, for example, be a net zero company, or contributing that you obviously, conserve your stakeholders, your employees, your shareholders, your communities, your customers. So that's what we mean with purpose. Now, in order to serve your purpose as part of society and as part of the future-driven company, we have to, you can look at how do you bring in these breakthrough technologies, exponential technologies. What kind of financial impact does it have? Can you impact more than millions of people, maybe even billions, if the purpose is big enough? Now, the desirable future part is for us very interesting, that you're not only looking at oh, I understand AI, I can make $1 billion and I have a 5-minute faster pizza delivery. That's a moonshot if you want, but for not in our definition at Futur.io. So we need to bring in these kind of the social impact as well as the ecological impact. If you start now developing products, you have to develop products which have these items in mind, whether it's a service or it's a real product or something tangible. You need to bring in the new generation. You need to bring in this new thinking, as well as what is the action plan for this decade. So, and here's the action plan for the decade, and it's the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You heard about them from a lot of other instances, maybe from TMA already and from other conferences. So you're very familiar about this. So this is for us a starting ground. If you're not addressing one of these items, then you might be still in business and you might be doing good business. But I think as a contribution for society and the big challenges and your longevity, then I think you have to address some of these issues. You know that the average that the corporation or company is in the Standard and Poor's in public index in the US is less than, I think, 17 years. So, it might be even 15 years. So there's so much change with corporations who are the winners. And now we have the tech people as winners. But if tech is only also producing, negative CO2 emissions, I think we will also see a shift towards, green hosting and how do you compensate your energy and so on and so forth. So I think there's a radical shift happening in corporations, which will be publicly traded, that you see that from the Moody's, so the rating agencies, as well as some of the big investors, they, Larry Fink and so on. So they shift people and urge people to address, if you're not addressing these SDGs, and if you're still in, a fossil fuel economy, your rating will go down very rapidly over the next couple of years. So it will be harder for you to finance yourself, and you will be considered a risk if you're not going into the positive direction. Now, once you understand the SDGs, we have these kind of, in our workshops, we go through a 4-week process where we address in live workshops in our masterclass frameworks. How do you actually develop your own work moonshot? How do you develop a feeling for time, and how you then present it to the other teams to see what kind of idea you came up with? And you learn that you basically practice online distance learning, you practice design thinking in a new way, moonshot thinking, taking it on another level, as well as really feel the energy of learning from other teams, as well as cross-pollinate from other industries possibly. So you have the chance to develop your moonshot, where you define what your goal is, and then basically have your North Star. That doesn't mean that maybe the next 2 weeks you are actually addressing this, but it has to mean that you actually lift up your head, need to know what you know where you want to go, similar to JFK, and then you have to design from this position of knowledge, and then backcast and say, well, what do I have to do the next 2 quarters if I want to be there in 5 years or 10 years? So here's maybe a couple of examples of moonshots right now. So here's Peter Vesterbacka. He's a famous Finnish CMO. He was behind the Eagle game. I don't remember right now. And so now he said, I want to build a tunnel. And obviously he's not building it alone, but basically he's just a normal man. He has good relationships with, around the world. And he said, I think we need to bring together Helsinki and Tallinn, and it will be a mega project for a big tunnel, the longest in the world, but bringing together almost like a Silicon Valley now into Finland and the Eastern European borderline there. We know that, Greta basically started a moonshot and helped us to remember, well, climate change is here, it's real, and it's something we have to address in the next 10 years. Also, Bojan Slat, for example, a young activist from Holland, and he developed funding and raised money to see if we could help with the, cleaning up plastics in the big ocean Pacific patch, as well as in the rivers before it actually goes into the ocean. And because he knows, I think less than 100 rivers in the world are responsible for 80% of the plastic getting into the ocean, plus obviously some of the boat from the boats itself. So young person, big idea, doesn't really know how to do it, but not, once you start the narrative and then start developing an idea, other people come to help, either with finance and or building a community of innovation around it. There's other moonshots in materials. For example, can we bring, get paper bottles, for example, so that we reduce weight in glass, but also definitely get rid of the plastic in itself, so that we have less pollution. Now, a whole other different ball game is energy. And here's a moonshot, which is a global, basically, effort, which happens to be built in France, but it's I think 20 nations or something are together building a nuclear fusion reactor, which helps hopefully to also reduce emissions and produce energy in a new way, especially if we know that the mega cities are starting or are growing. Another one which I could mention here is a big challenge, for example, for the building industry, cement, is every day we are building the equivalent of New York City, of Manhattan, in new buildings around the world. Every day a new New York. And these kind of the pollution, but also the, let's say, emissions from producing cement is a huge factor in the CO2 emissions after agriculture and fossil fuels engine and so on. So there's certain industries we really have to address. Now, obviously, some of the innovations also are, moonshots in itself, but bridging technologies as well as maybe new behaviors. So I feel that especially now in the COVID times, we have been dependent, at least here in the Western part, on deliveries, food deliveries, and so on. We couldn't really get out. So here's a concept car basically from Mercedes, from Daimler, and they want to bring in logistics. So this could be a UPS truck, but with drones on top of it, 2 drones, which could deliver the last mile maybe to some of the cities or remote houses from a central location, so to say. So new concept where drone technology goes into a new electric van with new other logistics concepts. So Mercedes-Benz has invested €500 million into a new development and investing in startups and so on. So one of the things we need to look at is desirable futures, and I will skip a little bit through this in the interest of time. But here's the idea, I think, to summarize where Moonshot Thinking can help you. First of all, this is your normal strategy. You are here, you did the last 3 years something, and the next 5 years you want to do better, better, better. But we think that, if you have your vision and you look at all the probable futures, what is happening, there is something reachable, which is a little bit higher. It needs more effort, and say, well, this is not the, let's say, down here is probable that you have maybe a pizza delivery 5 minutes faster, fine. But if you have, transportation of food, which is also comes with net zero emissions and better understanding of it, that's the higher part, and you still can make money from it and grow your company. So Moonshot is something which actually starts from here, but goes to the design and let's say the crazy idea of landing a moonshot, so to say, all the way out there. And then you come back and say, well, if I want to land there, how do I actually go with that vision? And I take every step. It's not that, you go straight there, but you need that narrative, you need the story, you need the strategy, and then you will help to understand that, look at this chart where, an iPad took 40 years to develop from the first sketch to something which is then really as slim and small that we knew from Star Trek before, from Hollywood. So, and I think I have like maybe 2 more minutes or 1.5. So I will skip through the imagination of movies and so on, and look at this example, if you will, that in Star Trek, you saw that, they had a 3D printer, which was 3 decades later developed actually as a real maker bot. And now you could say that, for example, the idea is here, your vision, and it's somewhere out there. And I want to close with one slide because I think I'm out of time. So imagine now, how could you address this as a car company? And so normally your car goes from here. The typical thing would be, okay, now the next level of Horizon 2 is develop something electric and self-driving. Okay, great. That's a straight line. It's still ambitious. It's still very innovative. But out of this, new for your industry and new for you as a company and a product would be, for example, maybe flying car, flying taxi, flying something. But a moonshot would be actually, well, is the flying taxi actually really, in synergy with the environment, or is it net zero or not? So let's think crazy if you are in design processes or in our workshop and say, well, what would Star Trek do? Well, they would maybe avoid either having cars or any kind of emission, and maybe just move the people directly, or have 3D meetings, VR environments like we have learned now, and you could actually save production of cars and moving around and flying to other cities and countries, because now we can do Zoom. And if we do the Zoom call and let's say plant trees, or have a green hosting provider for what our session is here right now, I think we're on a different track and on a better track. So this kind of thinking is something where we go deep, and this is the last slide I want to share with you. So this is thinking from Martin. You will enjoy his talk. Also that he will address you and say, well, from the moonshot itself, it's not necessary that you land on the moon on your strategy, but you have this perspective looking back from moon to Earth, and then you create your to-do list, basically. And that is the last picture, and this is Earthrise. So one of the biggest wonders and let's say achievements of moonshots, or going to the moon or trying to land a man on the moon, is even before we landed on the moon, is actually the look back to Earth. And so that change of perspective, that this is the precise moment, this is our planet, this is all we got, and this is what we have to take care of and understand. Now we are all in this global situation, and we all need to do our part for the future, which is also addressing the future of our kids. So thank you very much. I hope this gave you a short overview of what this future and moonshot thinking is all about. And in the other sessions of the Moonshot series, you will get the practitioners, the futurists, and the examples of practical use cases and success stories, as well as ideas and inspiration from the other faculty members. So I hope you can be part of it, and I see you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Harald. We will, we have like maybe 15 more minutes, to ask you questions. My first question would be that, you haven't mentioned a bit about the faculty. I know that you have a very diverse faculty, in both geographical area and their expertise. Would you please mention a bit about the faculty that we are looking at?
Yes, very much so. I'm really happy. We got some amazing people who are practitioners in their, let's say, own industries, and I think that's interesting for us to say. You have, for example, I can share this real quick. So you have a futurist from SAP. So Martin Wysowski, he is, he is every day for the global company SAP. He has been developed and asked for developing new ideas and concepts which can help in the IT sector or smart cities and different areas to think about the future and help with the mindset shift. Then here on the left, you have Pablo Rodriguez. He's now an ambassador advisor to X, the Moonshot Lab from Google, the one and only, or maybe the most famous one. But he was also the CEO of Telefonica Alpha, which was the first moonshot factory in Europe. And they developed, for example, a health moonshot, which is now sold to Johnson & Johnson, I think. Now, also, there's not only IT and moonshot thinking, but an architect, for example, Roxy Gülmeister with Foster & Partners. So they are famous for building the Apple headquarters. And she actually has an amazing story where how they think about building a house on Mars or any kind of habitats with restricted energy, restricted, any kind of resources, and how that mind experiment basically helped them design Apple headquarters and build more sustainable and also self-sufficient basically as an architecture. Then there's other futurists, a futurist from Daimler, for example, and there's Mark Buckley. He was already a speaker at TMA conferences, and he is sort of a trailblazer for the sustainable development goals. And Pascal Morgan, he was the former CIO of Coca-Cola in Europe, and now he has his own consultancy. So, and obviously there's purpose, leadership, as well as innovation examples from other corporates and working with innovation labs around Europe and or America.
Okay. Hi, Harold. I've been going through many of the Moonshot Thinking framework, and I came across the word cross-pollination, and I thought that that was a great word. Can you elaborate on this term for us?
Yes. So cross-pollination, you know, from little bees, where a bee goes from one flower to another flower, and then that's the only way that, you know, apples can grow or, you know, fruits develop or plants. And this cross-pollination for us is that you learn from different people in different industries which have a similar, you know, understanding. For example, with dealing with artificial intelligence, that we're all new in understanding how new ways of artificial intelligence and new ways of understanding robotics can help in our industry. So I think in sometimes we understand better from the same, let's say, level of industry or level of management from other industries, or you learn from other companies how they maybe deal with similar challenges, not necessarily that you exchange, you know, trade secrets, but it's more about how you go from thinking only, you know, linear to this exponential step. So the you know, putting diverse minds together, whether they're from architecture or from your industry, and having different, you know, diversity in age and in genders and in all these different aspects is definitely something that helps the innovation process, that, you know, you get more ideas from everybody in the room.
Okay, and so to be able to bring a good cross-pollination, you must have people who share the same interests, or they have to be a bit of futurist, correct? So what's your tips or what's your trick on getting futurists together, how to build this such a futurist community?
Well, first of all, I think if you are interested in this, then you will look for other people, because the best feeling is you are in a room and you are not the smartest person in the room, because you have other people you can learn from, that you can kind of quench your thirst for curiosity, but also that actually you never stop learning. And that so if you say we're inviting an open dialogue, I think you will attract also the people who want to be part of it. You always find people who are the pioneers, who might be alone, or maybe there's only 2 people in one corporation and there's, like, I don't know, 200 other people who are just interested in the status quo. Sometimes you have to be the, you know, I don't know, the butterfly, which, you know, the social butterfly, even bringing new information in, learning from other companies, and then try to bring this in and slowly change the process. And now we know slow doesn't really help anymore. We have to be all make a part in being a futurist. So that's one thought maybe I leave with you is, don't wait for somebody to have a plan. If you can decide on your area, and even, for example, if you can decide only on the budget of buying the copy paper, then tomorrow, the next time you buy this copy paper, please make it only recyclable copy paper. Or if you are in charge of, you know, purchasing and there's maybe something with plastic involved, try to talk with your supplier that plastic has to get out of this system, or that you find new ways. Even if it takes 3 years, you have to ask the hard questions, say, what can we do now? How can we replace it? And on every level of corporations, obviously you have the most influence if you're the CEO, but even as a CEO, you want to invite everybody in your, let's say, chain of commands and in your stakeholders to really be part of this. And that's the only way how we can move forward and how you can survive. You need to have more information from outside. You have to build your own ecosystem of forward-thinking people and then go into systems. You don't have to do it every day, but find your rhythm, how you can play with what your role is in the future. Are you still relevant 10 years from now? That is the biggest question. And you have to understand what your role is in your industry and in your country or in your hemisphere or in your ecosystem.
We have some questions from the floor as well.
I think we would go with the second question first because we're still with the people. But now, ขอคำถามที่สองขึ้นมาก่อนได้ไหมคะเรื่องขึ้น The question from the audience is how could we inspire people to be brave enough to think or to act like, futurists in this moonshot methodology?
Well, I think that the one thing is you don't have to get, you have to not be fearful. One thing is we have to be back in exploring and exchanging ideas, and no idea is crazy enough. We're over the 4 weeks, we are creating a safe space where you get to know everybody, you get to know how to use the tools, and then you get to know that if you have an idea, somebody else will not say, oh, that's a crazy idea, we have never done this. I think we have experienced over the last half a year that we do the Moonshot classes, and the last 3 or 4 years that we do it in real corporate programs, that people are always excited and say, oh, if you say this, I will say this. And then to develop this kind of safe space where ideas can happen. And that's the most interesting thing and important thing, that you take this back to your corporation, that you invite people for new ideas. And some people might have a fear and say, I'm not a futurist, I'm just Peter from mechanics. Great, Peter, or great Sally, your place is also here. We all have to, at every level of our companies, we have to all be innovative, even if it's just pushing 2% in the right direction. That's fine. Start with this. Make your first step.
Yeah, I agree. I was in one very brief moonshot program. And I understand that we don't have time to be fearful there. every minute, was worthwhile, and I had a lot of fun, joining the program. So no time to be fearful. We have another question, which relates to the sustainability. The audience asks, how could we integrate climate change into mass, general public more, and would you be able to share some practices applying this to the day-to-day life?
I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges, exactly, is how do we get people and change their mindset. I think it starts always with us, with one of us, and saying, okay, I now take, I don't know, litter up and put it in the trash can, or I watched that my plastic bottle is not thrown away. So I think that the mindset shift in people is definitely something that we all have to tackle. I think that governments and policy making is too slow. We know it's an important process, and that law has to be more made and updated. We know that the UN with the COP meetings every year is trying to do this, but it's a very slow process. It's also important, but we have to start from the ground up and make, it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes another village to, change the behavior that we all live a more sustainable life. And I think once you start to have these villages and or communities or a street, then other people want to say, hey, I want to live in that street. That they seems to be, right for the future. They understand that this is the right behavior right now. And maybe you even include you probably have young Gretas as well, and people, our kids who are activists and on the street, and try to go in dialogue with them and say, okay, what do you propose? How do you undo this? And if one street cleans up or one street has a certain impact, then it goes to the others in the city. Similar to your industry, if you are the one hotel, which is the sustainability hotel, and you have net zero and so on, you will attract all of a sudden the pioneers, also the ones who have more money, because they are educated, they're already forefront. So I think you will win if you already say, you're limited, you're going this way. You might be, I don't know, a vegan restaurant or something. We know these trends are rapidly, and over the next 2 or 3 years, this will change dramatically, I think, so that you can be a leader in everything you do, even if it's a small step. It will be an example for everybody else.
I like it very much that you include this, sustainability and resilient, purpose into the Moonshot thinking program. I find it very rare, that any training program or development program would, include this very important agenda into the methodology. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. 2 days ago, when we launched the a new product as well as celebrated the Moonshot Thinking Masterclass, we started a mission which is called Before This Decade Is Out, from the Kennedy speech. So beforethedecadeIsOut.org, where we invite everybody to make their own pledge and contribute and work together and take the first step. And this is all has been launched with very great speakers in the community from the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat, as well as United Nations Environmental Program. So it's very close to our heart and our network. And we hope that many of you can be joining us and be part in this journey, that you can be part of the future yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And one just small information for you that, at the moment we have people from different industry joining our program next month. So I'm looking forward very much to a very fruitful and, crazy idea generating program there. They are completely different industry. And I think it would be very interesting.
Yeah,
so we still have, a few more seats available. So, I would like to encourage those who haven't make decision yet to join us, to apply and to join this very important program, in collaboration with Futur from Germany. And we are looking forward very much to meeting you, online, and also maybe next year we can meet you on ground in person here in Bangkok. Right.
Yes, I can't wait to come and visit your country. And I really also invite whoever is listening and not yet committed, you can be a pioneer. And sometimes it's hard to be a pioneer. You might get some arrows in the back, but also you can be part of history. So I think we all have to do our part, and you can be leading this as a leader for your industry or for your company.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for your time today, Harold. And I think many of us have understand the way of thinking, Moonshot Thinking, and how Futur IO started. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Take care.
See you very soon. Bye.
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 Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.